Today I'm continuing this series on the soon coming King. This is part 5. I think I can get through next week. I think. We taught our kids when they were growing up, there's a difference between a plan and a promise. So we would say certain things like, "Yeah, we're going to go to Walmart or something, and this, that, and maybe you can get you something." But that's, well, you promised. No, that was a plan. We didn't end up going to Walmart. That was a plan. It wasn't a promise. And they remember that to this day. The plan is to finish this next week. It's not a promise. We shall see where that goes. And so today it's called Labor Pains, something I'm familiar with intimately. Not really. I was down in the cafeteria drinking a Coke and having a sandwich during that time. You're doing good, Deb. You should keep that up. And you'll see why I'm calling it that in just a minute. So, part 5, Titus chapter 2, verse 13. I'm gonna Cadillac through real fast today. All right. I pity anyone who's taking notes. Just forget it. Just go to the website or whatever. Go to Facebook later, whatever. Titus 2:13. While we wait for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior Jesus Christ. When Jesus appears in what I'm calling the rapture, what we call the rapture, when he takes his church up off this earth before the 7 years of tribulation, that's called the blessed hope. And I hope that it's a hope for you. 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 8. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, the Apostle Paul says, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. What an interesting phrase. All who have longed for his appearing. Do you long for his appearing? Yes. I hope you do. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 9 and 10. How you turn from idols to serve the living and true God and to wait for his Son from heaven. So I hope you're waiting. I hope you're expecting. I hope you're longing. And if you're not longing for his appearing, why not? One reason that we don't is we know that we have loved ones who don't know God yet, haven't connected to Jesus, and that's understandable, and that's why we have to get busy warning people and talking to people. And if you're too afraid to talk to people, I don't mean pigeonhole it or Jesus Jam or Bible Belt. I mean bring it up as the opportunity arises. If you're too afraid to do that, then you have a bigger problem. But we're talking about Jesus coming again. Next week, I'm solely covering the rapture event. Although I've talked about it in the past, I'm just going to solely cover points about why I think the rapture comes before the tribulation next Sunday. But God tells us what's going to happen before it happens. He always has. One of the proofs of God's existence is that he's a God that tells us what's going to happen before it happens with specificity. Isaiah 42:9, the past events have indeed happened. Now I declare new events. I announce them to you before they occur. God tells us what's going to happen before they happen. And not fuzzy, not ambiguous. Very specific. Let me give you an example of that. In Isaiah 42, verses 28, which is the last verse of that chapter, into chapter 45, verse 4, this is what God says. I'm not giving you the passage, I'm recapping it. God says, I'm raising up a Persian king by the name of Cyrus who will give you permission to leave Babylon and go back and rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. But Isaiah prophesied this. There's a guy by the name of Cyrus coming over 100 years before Cyrus was even born. And that was fulfilled in prophecy. You can read about it in 2 Chronicles 36, verse 22 and 23, and Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. God is very specific, and it gives evidence for his reality. And it's in history. You can read about it. In the past session, we looked up about, we looked up about Daniel, Daniel chapter 9. And I'm not going to go back into that. Actually, in lesson number 9 of the Christ in the Old Testament small group that we had, some of you were involved with that, I went into great detail about this. I'm not going into great detail about this due to time. But in Daniel chapter 9, the prophecy was from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple until Messiah comes. There would be 483 years, but those are months comprised of 30 days. And if you run that out, 483 years, 30 days per month, then you come out to 173,880 days. And friends, there was exactly 173,880 days from the time that King Artaxerxes issued that command until Jesus rode into Jerusalem as the Messiah and was recognized as the Messiah. I'd say that's pretty specific. God's not messing around. He tells things before they happen, and it gives proof that He is God. And that happened on March 14th, 445 BC. We know this from history. And we know April 6, 32 AD is when Jesus rode into Jerusalem. God prophesies things before they happen. And the Lord prophesied about the end of the age, and He gave us signs. So today I want to talk about signs. The end is very near. Signs. Those are those labor pains that build up to an event. Matthew chapter 16, 1-3. The Pharisees and Sadducees approached and tested Him, asking Him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, "When evening comes, you say, 'It will be good weather because the sky is red.' We say that to this day. And in the morning today will be stormy because the sky is red and threatening. We say that to this day. You know how to read the appearance of the sky, but you can't read the signs of the times." There are signs of the times. And God doesn't want us to be ignorant of them. He wants us to know about them. And the thing about labor pains is labor pains get closer together and more painful as time goes on. All right? Matthew 24 and verse 8. All these things, all these events are the beginning of labor pains. All the things that you're seeing in Matthew chapter 24 that He talks about that. And today I'm going to give you 10 signs that the end is very near. But all these events are there. He didn't say it's the end. He says it's just the beginning of the labor pains. And as I said, labor pains get closer together and more painful as time goes on. I've heard that. So let's start in giving you 10 signs that were at the very end. Number 1, after 2,500 years, Israel regathered as a nation. Jeremiah 16, verses 14 and 15. We've already given you these verses, but I'm recapping them. However, days are coming, declares the Lord, when it will no longer be said, "As surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites out of Egypt," but it will be said, "As surely as the Lord lives, who brought the Israelites up out of the land of the north," and out of all the countries. So this is not talking about coming back from Babylon the first time Israel was regathered. That only came back from one country, Babylon. This is talking about multiple countries. That's a different event. This is after 70 AD, when all the Jews were scattered around the world. There's a prophecy that He's bringing them back. And out of all the countries where He banished them, for I will restore them to the land I gave their ancestors. I'm bringing the Jews back to Israel. An incredible prophecy. That's a major, major prophecy that came to pass May 14th, 1948. But let's go on. I mean, that was a huge one. That's a very big one. But number 2 sign, and I've talked about this before, is Israel becomes a nation. Not just becomes a nation, becomes a nation in one day it becomes a nation. How many years did it take the United States to work through the process of becoming a nation? A number of years. Israel became a nation in 1948 in one day. Isaiah 66:8. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Can a land be born in one day or a nation be delivered in an instant? Yet as soon as Zion was in labor, that's the Jewish people, she gave birth to her sons. This happened on May 14th, 1948, when David Ben-Gurion declares Israel a sovereign nation. And on that day, they got together and they declared Israel was a nation, standing under the portrait of Theodor Herzl, the father of modern Zionism. And they declared their independence. And by the end of that day, President Truman recognized Israel as a nation. A huge, huge event in one day. Number 3 sign that we're in the very end of the end. Jerusalem captured and controlled by the Jews once more. Luke 21:24, Jesus talking, says Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. In other words, the Jews are going to come back and take possession of the city of Jerusalem. You have to understand from 1948 and on, they couldn't get into Jerusalem. That was shut off to them. But Jerusalem being captured by the Jews and taken control by the Jews. This happened in the Six-Day War. Here's a photo of the day that it happened, June 7th, 1967. And this is them coming up on the Temple Mount for the first time in awe that they have taken control of Jerusalem. An amazing prophecy that came to pass. Well, let's go on. Number 4 sign. You know, about this time you're thinking, number 4 out of 10, we're really going to be done in 10 minutes. I can assure you we are not. Number 4, nations of the world come against Israel. We talked about this before, but this is a big one. Zechariah chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. Look, I will make Jerusalem a cup that causes staggering. You have to see the metaphor in this, the symbolism in this. Jerusalem is going to be a hot point. It's going to be a flash point. The city of Jerusalem is going to be a cause for people staggering and stumbling, getting mad, angry. For the peoples who surround the city. The siege against Jerusalem will also involve Judah. On that day, I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. Again, a metaphor, a heavy stone, a serious thing. It's going to be a burden to them. All who try to lift it will injure themselves severely. You try to touch Jerusalem, you're in trouble. Isn't that interesting? And then he says, when all the nations of the earth gather against her. And the nations of the earth will gather against Jerusalem. It's coming up. But the point here is that the nations of the world come against Israel. This little parcel of land. I've been to Israel 5 different times. Fighter pilots and Israeli fighter pilots have to change direction every 20 seconds. Little postage stamp of a country. And everybody's mad about it. From 2006 to 2016, the United Nations Human Rights Council criticized Israel 68 times. 3 times more than any other nation. More than the bad guys in the world. Iran, North Korea, Syria, Russia, China, Venezuela. And from 2012 to 2015, there were 97 resolutions adopted by the United Nations, resolutions against countries. 83 out of 97 were against Israel. And the UN called Israel a racist state. That's the United Nations coming against Israel. Zechariah chapter 14, verses 1 through 5. Look, a day belonging to the Lord is coming, when the plunder taken from you will be divided in your presence. There's a reckoning coming. God's going to settle accounts. I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem for battle. The city will be captured, the houses looted, the women raped. Half the city will go into exile, but the rest of the people will not be removed from the city. Then the Lord will go out to fight against those nations. This is at the end of the 7-year tribulation, fight on the day of battle. On that day, his feet, Jesus' feet, the Messiah, will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives will be split in half from east to west, forming a huge valley of Jehoshaphat, so that half the mountain will move to the north, half to the south. You will flee by my mountain valley. For the valley of the mountains will extend to Azel. And you will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of King Uzziah of Judah. Then the Lord, my God, will come. Isn't this interesting? Then the Lord, my God, will come with all of his holy ones. The King James says, and the New King James says saints, with him. That's us. At the end of the 7-year tribulation, when he comes down to do battle, we're already up in heaven for 7 years during the tribulation. He comes back. The Lord will come with all of his holy ones. That's us. Revelation 19, 13, and 14 says it's the armies that ride down with him. But it's all about Jerusalem and the nations of the world coming against it. This is what Barack Obama said March 4th, 2012, about Israel. When the chips are down, I have Israel's back. He said that at the AIPAC conference, March 4th, 2012. That's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And the Jewish gullible crowd on that day, hearing him say those words, just clapped enthusiastically. 4 years later, less than 30 days before Obama left office, he took an act that, I got to be careful how I express this. Okay, I'll put it this way. Thumbed the United States nose at Israel. Here's an article, Obama's most shameful legacy. Washington Post, December 29th. This is just 3 weeks before he leaves office. What he does is there's a resolution condemning Israel for building settlements in East Jerusalem, West Bank, which is their land. They took it over in 1967. Israel should give up the West Bank. Yeah, about the time we give up Texas, they should do that. So the United Nations does a resolution to condemn Israel building settlements. Now, for 35 years, U.S. presidents had their person, their ambassador to UN, veto that kind of stuff, but not this time. No. Ambassador Samantha Power, he told her to abstain. And when the United States, instead of vetoing, abstains, that means that the measure can pass. And so the resolution was passed condemning Israel. Charles Krauthammer, who's the late Charles Krauthammer, anybody familiar with him? He's the one that wrote the article, Obama's Most Shameful Legacy. But something happened on December 6th, 2017, less than 1 year of being in office. President Donald Trump declared Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Sounds great, and it was great, and it is great. And it was tremendous. It was a huge event. I'm talking about signs leading up to the very end. That's a huge thing. It sounds great, but the very next day, the UN held an emergency meeting, and 14 out of 15 members condemned the U.S. decision to put our embassy in Jerusalem. But on May 14th, 2018, on the 70th anniversary of Israel becoming a nation, the U.S. opened its embassy in Jerusalem. But as great as that is and was, President Trump is still right now leaning on the Jews to not do any more settlements. In fact, the agreement with the UAE, United Arab Emirates, that I've talked about, that just happened a couple weeks ago, that's based on tentatively about them doing no more settlements. So even our President Trump is trying to squeeze them not to do any more settlements. Again, it's dividing the land. It's not good. Israel has repeatedly stated Jerusalem is the eternal, and listen to me, and I quote, the indivisible capital of Israel. They will not allow it to be divided whatsoever. That stance will lead the world into Armageddon right there. So that was number 4. The nations of the world come against Israel. Now related to this is, I've alluded to it, number 5 is the land of Israel is divided up. Joel 3 verses 1 and 2. Yes, in those days at that time. That's a key phrase. Because this leads up to the count. Where do we count from when we count up to the end times? Well, in those days at that time, When I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, that's when we start counting. I will gather the nations and take them to the valley of Jehoshaphat, which literally means Yahweh is judge. I will enter into judgment with them there because of my people, my inheritance, Israel. The nations have scattered the Israelites in foreign countries and divided up my land. And they have. They've given up, Israel's given up, as I said in the past, they've given up the Sinai Peninsula in the war with Egypt. They've given up the Gaza Strip. They've given up the West Bank. They've been pressured into doing those types of things. In 2005, President Bush compelled Israel to give up the Gaza Strip. Not good. 1 week later, Katrina hit the U.S., and the leading Israeli rabbi, Rabbi Obadiah Yosef, declared it was judgment on the U.S. for forcing Israel to give up her land. Now, it may have been, maybe it wasn't, I don't know, but they thought so. Joel 3, 1 and 2, and I'm going back to that. In those days at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations and take them to the valley of Jehoshaphat. I will enter into judgment with them there because of my people, my inheritance, Israel. The nations have scattered the Israelites in foreign countries and divided up my land. Listen, it says the same days and season counts up when Armageddon is coming. That's where we count from. And Jesus said this in Matthew 24:34, truly I tell you, this generation, we've defined that for you, will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. So question, when are we counting from? When God restores the fortunes of Judah, Joel 3:1. That was restored in 1948. And for decades and decades, the world, including the United States, have been pressuring Israel to give up land, including now East Jerusalem. So number 5 is a sign of that Israel's land is being divided up. God's not partial for it because, listen to this, it's not the Palestinians' land. And it's not Jewish land. It's not Jewish land. Say what? Say what? We just read it. God says you're dividing up my land. It's God's land. And he's not real favorable when people do that. Number 6, sign of the end. And some will smirk at this. A tetrad of blood moons, all on Jewish holy days. We're talking about a lunar eclipse here. A tetrad is a group of 4. A tetrad of blood moons, all on Jewish holy days. Every time there has been a tetrad, group of 4 of blood moons on Jewish holy days close together, something very significant has happened regarding the Jews and the nations of Israel. I'm not going to take time to teach it. I'll just run down real quickly. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. 1492 and 1493, the beginning of the regathering of Jews. How did that happen? King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella expelled all the Jews out of Spain if they did not convert to Catholicism. It was a major thing, not good. But that's when that tetrad of 4 blood moons happened. Let's go up the calendar. 1949, 1950, Israel became a nation. In 1948, but it wasn't established as a government until 1949. 1967, 1968, for the first time in 2,500 years, the Jews took control of Jerusalem. In 2014 and 2015, the last tetrad of blood moons, Sukkot, October of 2015, that started the third Intifada, which means Palestinian uprising started. October saw unprovoked stabbings of Israel citizens, even in Jerusalem, and you saw that in the news if you're paying attention. 2017, the U.S. Embassy announces its embassy move to Jerusalem. That is huge. And in 2018, embassy was moved on May 14th, 2018 ceremony. So a blood moon tetrad on Jewish holy days won't happen again for another 500 years. But God did something with the moon. And we laugh at this. Tom, stop, God created the moon and planets for signs. He did. Genesis 1:14, New American Standard. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the light, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." The word signs in the Hebrew means a sign, an omen, a warning, a token. It is the same word used in Genesis 9:12, where it says the rainbow was given to us as a sign from God. What does a sign do? It communicates. And the stars and the moon was given to us as signs to communicate. Joel 2:31, the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Now, it didn't say how many days or months before the great and terrible day. It just says it's coming before. Now, everybody poo-pooed the blood moons in 2014 and 2015 when nothing happened those 2 years, including me. But that's a misinterpretation of the 4 blood moons. It didn't mean it was going to be happening that month or even that year. It simply means they're signs, they're birth pains that are leading up to a delivery. That's what the signs mean. The blood moons simply mean that the day of the Lord is very, very close. Number 7 sign, dramatic increase in knowledge and world travel. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. But you, Daniel, keep these words secret and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will roam about and knowledge will increase. And we go, isn't that nice? That's a nice verse. Praise the Lord. King James says, many run to and fro, knowledge shall increase. One of the marks of the end times is world travel increase dramatically and an increase in knowledge. Dramatic increase in knowledge. Buckminster Fuller did he was a guy that studied these things, and how often does knowledge double or increase? He's dead now, but he did this scale and this data point. And from the Gutenberg press on, knowledge began to double every 100 years. That's what he discovered. And so the knowledge growth accelerated dramatically every 100 years. Now that was up to a certain point, but now knowledge is doubling every 12 months. Soon to be every 12 hours, according to an April 19, 2013 article right there in Industry Tap magazine. So a dramatic increase in world travel for the masses of people. That resulted in globalization. The world is small. One can be on the other side of the world in just a matter of hours. Daniel's prophecy has come past, and it said at the end of time. Increase in knowledge, and people will go to and fro. Number 8 sign is a great apostasy, falling away. That's one of the signs of the end time, is what is called a great apostasy. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 3, for that day will not come unless the apostasy, the falling away, comes first. Jesus talking said, Matthew 24:10, then many, not a few, many will fall away. They're called deconversions today. Did you ever hear the term deconversions? Christian deconversions. It's people dropping off, dropping out of Christianity. On July 26, 2019, just a year ago, Joshua Harris, former megachurch pastor, author of the infamous purity culture bestseller, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, announced on Instagram he was no longer a Christian. Quote, by all measurements, that I have for defining a Christian, I am not a Christian. Megachurch pastor, author. I don't view this moment negatively. I feel very much alive, awake, and surprisingly hopeful. A couple weeks later, Marty Sampson, a former songwriter and prolific songwriter for Hillsong Music and Worship, a gigachurch, posted on Instagram that he was in the process of disassociating himself from Christianity. And you can go on. In the recent years, other prolific Christians, artists, intellectuals, Michael Gungor of the worship band Gungor, Aaron Gillespie and Spencer Chamberlain of the Christian rock band Under Oath, New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman and fiction writer Anne Rice have publicly announced their deconversion from Christianity. Apostasy, deconversions. But apostasy also includes falling away from orthodox, sound teaching of the Word of God. Not just falling away from Christianity, but falling away from sound teaching. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 3 and 4, for the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine, and we are in that age. Instead, to suit their own desires, they'll gather around them a number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth. We are in that age. False teachers within Christianity are a mark of the end days. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 and 2 and 15. There were indeed false prophets among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you. They will bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who bought them, and will bring swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow their depraved ways, and that's what's going on now. They have gone astray by abandoning the straight path. Doctrinal apostasy includes heretical teachers, but that's not all. Number 9 sign, a dramatic increase in evil and violence. A dramatic increase in evil and violence. Matthew 24:12, Jesus talking says, because lawlessness will multiply, the love of many will grow cold. The word lawlessness is anomia. A means without, like atheist, without God. Nomia is law, without law. And it simply means without law, refusal to come under laws. Has anyone noticed an escalation of violence lately? Has anyone noticed in society lately the spurning of law and law officers? The love of many will grow cold. Riots, cities on fire, innocent people being killed. Yes, there is an increase in the love of many growing cold and lawlessness happening. Let me name some. Abortion, the most hideous of evils. That's a 9-week-old living fetus, but perfectly formed. The mom probably didn't even know she was pregnant 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago. Perfectly formed baby. 2,900 babies each day die in the U.S., one every 30 seconds from abortion. 50 million babies die yearly worldwide. Evil. LGBT plus activism is happening at an alarming rate. Here's an article that these states require schools to teach LGBT history in public schools. And it is being taught in public schools. Here's a quote that I put up not too long ago on Facebook. I'll read it to you again. It's about overlooking evil. First, we overlook evil. Then we permit evil. Then we legalize evil. Then we promote evil. Then we celebrate evil. And then we persecute those who still call it evil. And that's where we are today with abortion, with LGBT and all that stuff. Unbelievable. One of the most despicable images I remember seeing is the White House on June 26, 2015. The president of our country celebrated wickedness by the rainbow colors on the White House after Obergefell and Hodges by the Supreme Court that allowed gay marriage to be legal. That's horrible that our president did that. Now, why is it horrible? Because Jesus says it's horrible. Matthew 19, verses 4 to 6. This is how God defines marriage. Haven't you read, Jesus talking, he replied, that he who created them in the beginning made them male and female? By the way, genders are male and female. Surprise. There's 2 genders, and it's male and female. Is that what the world's saying? He also said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, female, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And he quotes that from Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24. So both God the Father and Jesus define marriage as between one man and one woman. Period. What's even more boggling to me is when supposed Christians are in favor of gay marriage. It just boggles my mind. They favor the world's definition of marriage over Jesus' definition of marriage. Romans 12:2, the Phillips translation, New Testament says, don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold. But that's exactly what Christians have done. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remold your minds from within. And sadly, Christians have taken that route. They've just adopted the culture of the world, sprinkled holy water on it, and said it's okay. No, transgender, God made them male and female. It's a mental disorder called gender dysphoria. It's a mental disorder. And what we do is we wave the magic wand and declare it normal and healthy. Unbelievable. Lawlessness will increase in the last day without law. And society wants us to bow to transgender. This is very simple physically, physiologically, genetically. If you have an XY chromosome, you're a male. If you have an XX chromosome, you're a female. If anyone's confused on that, I can talk to them after service. I could get a little bit more descriptive on body parts, but I don't think I will. But I could. I got, the other day, I sent an email to the Maine CDC because I wanted to know the breakdown of ages on COVID deaths, because I thought that's significant. Of course, the Maine CDC put up a fight about that and didn't want to give me, so they just said, well, we don't have that information, but maybe you can find it on this link. I was like, getting the email back, you're kidding. You're the Maine CDC and you can't give me the breakdown on ages of COVID deaths? They said, they said, who are you? Before they responded, I said, I'm a citizen. So the lady at the Maine CDC, I won't give her name, but she sent back and she put her signature. And in parentheses, it said, she, her, hers, for her pronouns. That's how they sign their signature on emails now. And I sent back and I said, thank you, parentheses, a guy. I did. You got to sign your signature, him, his, he. Oh my goodness. Then we come to pornography and child pornography. I'm not even going to go into that. Now the new thing is polyamory. You never hear of polyamory? Polyamorous relationships? Sexual and marriage relationships with more than one person. So here's July 3rd, 2020, USA Today, about a city that now recognizes polyamorous relationships in the city's domestic partnership policies. 3 partners together. And what does it say? Massachusetts. Well, where is this city? Where would that be? Somerville, Massachusetts, right out of Boston. In their city ordinances, recognize polyamorous. You say this polyamory is not going to happen in the United States. It's already happening. We got to wake up. Utah has decriminalized polygamy. They have said in Utah it's no longer a crime. We're not going to pay attention to it. It's like getting a speeding ticket, which is basically decriminalizing it. In Utah, polygamy basically being legal. Incest, pedophilia, all this stuff. Pansexualism. That's the new term. Pansexualism. Being taught in schools. What is pansexualism? Not limited to having sex with humans. You can have sex with robots, animals, whatever. And kids are learning about this in school. Now, what happens when a society calls all these things good? I'll tell you what happens. Or people, or even Christians that call this stuff good. Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe means, in the New Living Translation, what sorrow to those, to a country that calls good evil and evil good. Lawlessness, violence, sign of the last days. Number 10, last sign, persecution and killing of believers. Matthew 24:9. They will hand you over to be persecuted, and they will kill you. You'll be hated of nations because of my name. Persecution and killing of believers is going to escalate and has escalated in these end times. In the last very few years, there's been a dramatic increase in the persecution and killing of Christians around the world. I could document this a lot more than I am, but I'll just give you a few. The BBC has an article, Christian persecution at near genocide levels. See that? That's just from a year ago, March 3rd, 2019. That's what's happening in our world. Do Christians pay attention to it? Not really, because we're in America. About the most persecution we get is people snickering at us when we say grace at a restaurant or have a Jesus bumper sticker. Fox News reporting, Christian persecution set to rise sharply in 2019. Matters India was reporting on persecution in India. Yeah, there we go. Oh, Open Doors. I'm sorry. Yeah, Open Doors. I'm sorry. Open Doors. Oh, listen to this. 260 million Christians living in places where they experienced high levels of persecution. That's just in 1 year. 260 million Christians. 2983 Christians killed for their faith in 1 year. 9488 churches and other Christian buildings attacked. 3,711 believers detained without trial, arrest, sentence, or imprisoned. Now Matters India talks about the persecution happening in India. Christians' persecution shows dramatic increase. That was back 4 years ago. In China, what's happening in China? In China, they're closing churches, jailing pastors, and even rewriting Scripture. That's what's happening. In Uganda, this was just reported in the news yesterday. A 20-year-old Muslim was killed by his family in Uganda for converting to Christianity. That's just yesterday. Last days will be marked by dramatic increase in persecution and killing of Christians. You don't feel it in the United States, but we're starting to. Churches, you can go to protest, you can go to bars, but you can't go to church. Take the state of California. You can do this, you can do that, but you can't go to church. What do you call that? 10 signs were at the end of the age. Luke 21, verse 28, I'll close up here. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift your heads, because your redemption is near. And I would say with the 10 signs I just gave you, perk up. Your redemption is near. Matthew 24:34. Today, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. 10 signs of the end of the age. And then what happens? The rapture. And next Sunday, I'm going to cover that in a little bit more detail. But I think we're there. I think we're there.